Hello there. I'm glad you made it here. Settle into a comfortable spot. Let your shoulders loosen and let each breath arrive like a small tide returning to shore. Tonight, we're going to wander through a gentle, curious idea. What if the universe has already finished its grand story long ago, and what you call your life is a memory still shimmering on the surface of time? This isn't a tale meant to unsettle. It's an invitation to rest inside a question. Imagine the cosmos as a quiet echo, where moments continue to glow even after the orchestra has played its final note. In that glow, your warmest memories, your softest routines, and the people you love keep their shape, like stars whose light keeps traveling while the night grows still. As you drift, we'll explore how physics and philosophy think about time, endings, and the way meaning lingers. If these calm explorations help you rest, a light tap on, like and subscribe is a kindness so others can find their way here too. For now, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin. Imagine time not as a river carrying you away, but as a wide lake at night, perfectly still. All the stars are already reflected there, the first steps you ever took, the words you haven't spoken yet, the small kindness you'll offer tomorrow without planning it. The surface looks like motion when the breeze of attention passes over it. Your life, then, may be less a line and more a constellation, each point glowing at once, and you walking among the lights, one careful breath at a time. It feels strange because every day has trained you otherwise. We speak in tenses as if they were the laws of weather. We worry forward and remember back, and call the brief span in the middle now, as if now were a bead sliding along a wire. Bodies are built to agree with the story. There's a pulse, a step, a blink, a cycle of wake and sleep. Even so, nature has a habit of placing ladders behind familiar walls. Look closely, and the wall isn't a wall, it's a veil, and the ladder is right there. The mind itself, patient as it tries to be, runs on small delays and reconciliations. Signals arrive at slightly different times from eye and ear and skin. Your brain, polite host that it is, waits a fraction of a second, just a whisper of a pause, to gather the guests, seat them, and announce, "This is the present." That whisper is short enough not to alarm you, long enough to be measurable in careful experiments. In that pause, the brain edits. It smooths the edges of the world and hands you a single moment, wrapped and warm. The wrapping is not a lie, it's care, yet the care can be mistaken for the thing itself. Consider how flexible this wrapping can be. There are people whose injuries or illnesses loosen the knots that hold moments together. For some, events no longer settle into a clean sequence. Sound jumps ahead of sight, or memory won't pin itself to place. To live like that is hard, but it also hints at a truth. The seamless thread we feel is woven, not discovered, by the machinery of mind. The loom is exquisite, but it is still a loom. Evolution would prefer a loom to a map of eternity. The animals that guessed where berries would ripen tomorrow or where a shadow might become a leap had an advantage. A brain that predicted and rehearsed, that sorted before and after, quickly enough to act, was a good tool for staying alive. Tools do not become true by being useful. A compass can guide you, even as the Earth's magnetic field murmurs in complex curls you never see. Color is useful that way. The apple feels red to your sight, though what's out there is a polite riot of wavelengths and quanta. The redness is the brain's translation. And perhaps the flow of time is a translation to fluency, mistaken for reality. The way a smooth story feels more honest than a careful set of footnotes. Now lift your gaze from the bedside to the larger room of the cosmos. Early in the last century, a quiet revolution rearranged the furniture so thoroughly that we still bump into it. A young patent clerk wrote about how clocks disagree when they move through space, and how light refuses to pick favorites. In the equations that followed, the idea of a single, absolute now dissolved like mist. Two sparks that seem to occur together for one traveler won't line up for another who is gliding by at a different speed. There is no master clock under glass, ticking out a universal present for every galaxy to obey. Each path through the universe carries its own rhythm, its own accounting of when. This sounds like a magic trick until you remember how often we rely on it. The satellites whispering in the sky that help your phone find its way must constantly correct for time passing differently up there, where the motion is swift and gravity is thin. Their onboard clocks drift from yours, not because anything is broken, but because the fabric they move through asks them to. Without those relativistic corrections, tiny, precise acts of humility, our maps would wander by kilometers each day, and even the simplest journey would become a kind of guessing game. Practicality, then, becomes a witness for wonder. The weirdness works. It helps when strangeness piles up to change metaphors. Instead of a river, think of a landscape. The mountains already exist, whether or not you have seen them. From a train window, peaks rise and fall. Ridges approach and pass by. Valleys open like books and close again. From the seat, it feels like a procession, a choreography of arrival and departure. Step off the train and climb a ridge, though, and the whole range is there at once. What changes is your path, not the mountains. If the universe is more like a landscape than a current, then what you call the past and what you call the future are regions with their own features. Consciousness might be the movement, slow and sure, that reveals them one by one. Look deeper into the ground beneath that landscape. Space and time are not two separate floors in some cosmic house. They are interwoven threads of one wide fabric. Pull on the thread of motion and the thread of duration loosens. Tug on gravity and clocks change their tempo, softening their ticks near heavy stars, quickening where the pull is gentle. Physics writes this not as poetry, but as geometry, yet the picture it draws is oddly lyrical, a four-dimensional quilt where every event, every handshake, every supernova has its coordinates stitched in for good. The quilt does not happen, it is. We, moving along our particular seams, feel the softness as expansion and sequence, just as walking along the ridge drapes the mountains into a story of before and after. If that sounds like the world locked into a frozen block, it helps to remember that stillness can hold motion the way a musical score holds a symphony. The whole piece is on the page at once. No note becomes another on paper. But meaning happens when the bow draws, when air vibrates, when a listener's attention moves through time, shaping pattern into experience. The block is not a prison if the path through it can be lively. Your attention is the bow, your breath is the metronome. The universe may be the score. The mind's craft its talent for weaving guides how the score is heard. There is evidence that we live a split second in the past, a tiny buffer that gives the senses time to agree on what just occurred. In that buffer, the brain revises. A touch on the shoulder felt to coincide with a flash may be gently retimed so they share a moment. Sound arrives slower than light, yet a clap and a spark can be presented to you as one event if they fall within a small window. These are not tricks, they are courtesies. They keep you from being whiplashed by the world's speed and unevenness. They also loosen the idea that the present is a razor-thin slice with absolute meaning. The present is a window, and the frame is adjustable. Sometimes, windows shift farther, under stress, awe, danger, or deep focus. Time seems to stretch or collapse. Athletes speak of plays unfolding in gentle detail they could never recall in daily life. A moment of fear can pack a minute with 100 small observances. In quiet joy, an afternoon evaporates. Chemistry and networks explain some of this, neurotransmitters changing the filter settings, attention altering what is admitted and what is ignored. It is a reminder that the dial marked now is part of the instrument. The world outside has its own timings, indifferent and exact, while experience dances to a melody conducted from within. Even memory plays by generous rules. The past feels like a place you could revisit, but what you have is a living document, rewritten each time it is opened. Neurons that fire together in the act of remembering can alter the trace, strengthening some paths, letting others fade. That doesn't make the past unreal. It makes it participatory. If all moments exist in the deep structure, what you hold and how you hold it matters, because holding is part of the pattern too. The quilt includes the hand that touches it. On cosmic scales, the fabric shows its own slow flexing. Gravity curves space-time so that light bends, time dilates, and the shortest path between 2 points is not a straight line, but a patient arc. Near massive objects, clocks run slow. Far from them, they hasten. Deep under mountains or in orbit, instruments have watched these differences play out without drama, like tides obeying a moon they cannot see. A particle born high in the atmosphere lives longer when it speeds toward the ground, long enough to reach detectors it would otherwise miss. Length and time things we grow up treating as firm, soften under motion and mass. The universe remains consistent, but not in the way our instincts prefer. If there is no universal now, then the sentence, "everything is happening at once," is as misleading as "everything is happening in a line." Both are the wrong shape. A better shape might be a garden at dusk. Fireflies rise and dim, and from your chair it seems like they answer one another, but their rhythms are their own. Walk a few steps, and a new pattern appears. From farther off, an owl calls, and the moment changes, not because the fireflies altered, but because new features of the scene reached your ears. The scene was whole. Your relation to it shifted. The cosmos may be like this, too vast for any one vantage to hold its pattern, yet generous enough to offer a local melody, here and here and here, each true within its frame. Does this unsettle the thought of choice? If the path is on the map already, where does freedom live? Perhaps in the way rivers are free to flow within their banks, carving curves that were latent in the land. Perhaps in how attention selects, how compassion leans, how care repeats a gesture until it becomes part of someone else's landscape. If meaning arises when a score is played, then musicianship matters. You are not the blankness between printed notes. You are the bow, arm, and the ear. It is tempting to think such ideas are only for chalkboards in midnight cafes, far from ordinary rooms where someone is learning to be gentle with themselves. Yet here, among pillows and steady breaths, they become intimate. If time does not flow the way it seems, you are not being carried away from your life. You are inhabiting it from a changing vantage. The memory of a hand you held years ago is not a ghost. It is a star whose light is still arriving. The worry about tomorrow is a cloud with edges you can learn to soften. The present, rather than a narrow edge, is a spacious porch from which to consider many views at once. The old stories were not foolish to draw time as an arrow. Arrows are useful. They give direction, urgency, a reason to begin. But arrows alone can make us harsh with ourselves, as if being late or early defined our worth. The landscape view invites tenderness. If everything that will be and has been is written into the quilt, then your rest tonight is not separate from the world's work. It is one of its quiet forms. Muscles repair, memories sort. Tiny glial cells sweep the synapses like conscientious janitors after the concert, preparing the hall for morning. None of this rushes. The body knows the tempo. You can picture time as a library where the shelves curve and intersect in ways a human architect would not have imagined. Somewhere, the book of your first day at school is open. Somewhere, the book of an afternoon you have yet to live rests with a ribbon marking its middle. A librarian who can step outside the aisle system might see all the spines at once, but you are not that librarian. You are a reader with a warm lamp. Turning the page, you're on. The page is enough. The sense that other chapters exist does not lessen the ink on this one. If you listen closely, even the language we use begins to shift. We say time passes, as if it were a breeze. Perhaps it is we who pass, like swimmers in a clear lake, our motions making ripples that meet and interfere and finally smooth themselves away. The lake holds all the patterns we make, even the subtle ones, inside its vastness. The moon, indifferent and kind, pulls on that surface from far off, and the swells we call hours and years fall into a long, patient rhythm. Nothing is taken, everything is rearranged. The lesson here is not to stop planning or remembering, nor to treat your days as a puzzle with a hidden answer. It is to loosen, a little, the grip of the idea that you are being pushed. You can place your attention like a lantern instead of an oar. You can let meaning gather the way dew does, quietly, evenly, across the grass of your experience. When fear tightens your chest, imagine the train window opening onto the full range, peaks and valleys present together, your motion the only source of sequence. The next breath, then the next, then sleep. If the universe finished its main movement long ago, and what remains is light still traveling, you are part of that glow. Your routines, your imperfections, the way you return to simple kindness as if to a familiar path, all of that shines. Physics did not invent peace, but it can lend you a way to picture it, not a force that drags, but a fabric that holds. The fabric does not hurry you. It can accept a pause. It can include a long exhale without falling apart. Imagine running a fingertip across its weave and feeling not a single thread pulling forward, but many threads already in place, soft, intersecting, full of pattern. From here, a possibility unfolds like a quiet room you hadn't noticed before, that all the moments of a life are present together, not queued like passengers at a gate, but arranged like rooms in a deep house. This is the intuition behind eternalism, the block universe view that treats time as another dimension of the world's geometry, as real as length or height. In such a picture, the scene you call now is one cross-section of a larger whole. Turn the slice slightly, and another scene appears, childhood light spilling across the floor, a future kindness already warm each, as actual as the one in your hands. Physicists came to this not out of hunger for paradox, but by following measurements where they led. When simultaneity depends on motion, the idea of a single, absolute present starts to soften. Precision clocks flown around the globe return home, showing that speed and altitude have nudged their ticks apart. Particles living quick, bright lives in accelerators endure longer when they sprint near light. Signals sent between satellites and receivers on the ground must be corrected for these shifts, or they lose the thread of Earth's surface. None of this screams mystery. It just does its work. Yet, taken together, it sketches a world where when is woven with where, and slices of time, like slices of space, are features of perspective. To picture it gently, think of a long loaf resting on a cutting board. Each slice is a complete face, its own constellation of seeds and air pockets, yet the whole loaf is present at once. Or imagine a map with contour lines. Each line is a level, but the mountain is all the lines together. In the block universe view, your life is not a bead sliding along the string. It is the string entire, knotted with meetings, smoothed by routines, bent by choices, and it exists as a four-dimensional shape in the fabric of space-time. Birth is not behind you. It is a region of that shape. An old age you have not felt yet is another region. The shape holds them both. This does not immediately tell you why it feels like you are moving. Feeling is the work of a living system, and living systems make sequences out of difference. The brain gathers signals with slightly different travel times and stitches them into a scene, then carries that scene forward with memory, short echoes stored in a network of cells that strengthen when revisited. There is evidence that a small buffer, a breath of an instant, sits between raw arrival and conscious awareness, letting vision and sound and touch negotiate a common now. The negotiation is kind. It is also creative. Out of it comes the feeling of flow, like a lantern circle wandering across a field where the dew already lies. If the landscape exists all at once, consciousness may be the lamp, not a ghost hovering above matter, but the organized activity of matter itself, billions of neurons humming in synchronized patterns, casting attention like a beam that selects what to reveal next. The beam doesn't create the meadow. It discloses it in an order. Some philosophers call this spotlight, a model of temporal experience. The world line is fixed, but the felt present is the illuminated patch that slides along it. Others suggest a richer picture, in which experience is not a point moving, but a window with adjustable frames, wide during awe, narrow during fear, skewed by illness or medicine. Whatever the framing, the world outside the window keeps its contours even as the view changes. Identity becomes more spacious in this setting. You are not merely the current page. You are the book's full arc. The child who learned the rhythm of a lullaby, the friend who remembered a birthday without a reminder, the elder who knows how to pause before answering. Each chapter is written into the geometry. Each character is you. Growth, in this view, is not matter transforming a single thing from less to more. It is the structure of the arc itself, a pattern in which later pages contain traces of the earlier lessons encoded as pathways through the tissue of the brain, preferences settled like worn paths across a field. The you who apologizes next year and the you who learns to rest today are both present in the tapestry. They meet when the lamp finds the seam between them. The thought of mortality quiets a little here. Death is not a trapdoor slammed shut, but the boundary where a particular pattern ends like the edge of a quilt. Within the block, the whole figure remains. The laughter, the stray kindness left on a kitchen counter, the late-night worry that taught someone else to be gentle. To say that the figure exists can be misleading because experience insists on motion, but the geometry does not. The comfort is subtle, not survival beyond the pattern, but the acknowledgement that the pattern is complete and present, even when the lamp has moved on. Yet, agency matters. If the pattern is already there, what becomes of choice? The question often arrives like a cold wind, but can be met with calm. Consider a melody written on a staff. On paper, every note is fixed. None leaps or hesitates. When played, the musician still shapes the phrase, leaning into a tone, giving it breath, letting a silence linger, a hair longer than strict time would demand. The shaping is not outside the piece. It is part of it, encoded in dynamics and tempo markings, in the performer's training and temperament. In the block universe view, your decisions are features of the shape. Neurons that will fire do fire. Muscles that will reach do reach. Words that will be chosen are chosen. Responsibility is not erased by being included. Inclusion is the only way responsibility exists at all. The path through a garden is part of the garden's design. This garden is colored by thermodynamics too, the long, gentle river of entropy that gives direction to time's arrow in ordinary life. Glass shatters more readily than it reassembles. Warm tea cools on a countertop. Galaxies evolve from smoother beginnings into structures with luminous knots. The increase of disorder over large scales doesn't contradict the block. It gives the block some of its texture. From your lamplit vantage, you remember lower entropy states more easily because memory itself requires energy and leaves traces in the brain. Those traces accumulate in one temporal direction, like ripples spreading from a stone. The asymmetry you feel is tied to these traces. It is easier to keep records of what has happened than what will happen, because keeping is a physical process with a preferred direction. Those who worry the future is sealed sometimes forget how it appears from inside a lived moment. An unopened letter on a table can contain bad news or kindness, but your hands still decide when to unfold it. Your face still decides how to soften. From the block's point of view, the softening is part of the letter's world. From your point of view, it is chosen. Both perspectives can be true without conflict because they answer different questions. Geometry describes what is, while experience describes how it feels to traverse what is. Feeling matters because lives are lived in it, not above it. This view does not demand that consciousness float apart from physiology. The brain is perfectly capable of generating a stream of experience by integrating signals and predicting what likely comes next. Under the hood, networks fire in nested rhythms. Information flows along white matter highways. Glial cells modulate the scene. Neuromodulators tune the overall mood. The spotlight of attention rides those mechanisms like a careful canoe on a broad lake, steering by small strokes, reacting to currents and wind, sometimes gliding, sometimes pausing. That the canoe's path is part of the lake's larger geometry does not make the steering unreal. It simply places steering in its honest context. Doubts remain, and they're healthy. Some thinkers argue that experience can't be fully captured as patterns in space-time, that it has a first-person texture not reducible to third-person description. Others counter that texture itself is a high-resolution feature of the pattern, one we only barely understand. Either way, the night can hold both positions without strain. You don't have to adjudicate metaphysics to breathe easier. It's enough to notice that the feeling of being swept away may be a misunderstanding of how you stand in relation to a larger, calmer whole. Practical life keeps pace with these abstractions in surprising ways. Navigation systems remain accurate by respecting the way time bends near mass and under motion. Hospitals synchronize instruments with clocks stable enough to register those bends. Underground detectors watch brief particles live just long enough to be counted because speed has stretched their time. Each of these is a small candle on the path points of light, showing that the fabric's strange behavior is dependable. Dependable is a good word for bedtime. It means you can put something down and trust it will still be there when you reach for it again. Even the way time bends around mass or stretches with motion can be relied on. It never cheats its own design. And yet, within this reliability, there hides an undeniable drift. Broken glass never leaps back together. You never see a puddle turn neatly into ice cubes. Eggs do not unscramble. There's a direction that feels carved into the fabric of everything, a gentle one-way slope we call the arrow of time. That slope is not a poetic trick. It's written in one of the simplest and most universal laws in physics, the second law of thermodynamics. It whispers that in any closed system, entropy, a measure of disorder or randomness, always increases. Entropy isn't chaos in the everyday sense. It's a count of how many microscopic arrangements can make up the same visible scene. A crystal, atoms locked in place, has few possibilities. A cloud of gas, endlessly jostling, has nearly infinite ones. Statistically, there are far more ways for things to be messy than to be neat. So the universe drifts toward the likely, the numerous, the disordered. From that simple imbalance arises time's direction. The past is where entropy was lower, the future where it is higher. We remember the past because memory making means forming order, little pockets of pattern inside a wider sea that is always loosening its grip. To build memory, the brain consumes energy, leaves marks, writes structure. The act itself pushes the surrounding world slightly further along the slope. We can't recall the future for the same reason we can't stand upstream in a current made of probability. But if every moment already exists inside the great four-dimensional block of space-time, in what sense does entropy increase? Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps the block is simply shaped with an intrinsic gradient, one end tight and low in entropy, the other loose and diffuse. Consciousness would then be the traveler moving along that built-in slope, experiencing the tilt as time flowing. The second law wouldn't describe a process unfolding. It would describe the geometry of the whole, how the universe is written from cold order to warm diffusion. Seen this way, the low entropy beginning of everything, the smooth, bright cradle we call the Big Bang, isn't a miracle of coincidence. It's the narrow end of the gradient. The far side, billions of years away, along the same block, is the big freeze, a stretched out stillness where energy lies thinly spread, temperature everywhere, nearly the same, motion almost meaningless. Stars will burn out, black holes will fade through Hawking radiation, even light itself will lose ambition. It sounds tragic, yet within the block, that frozen horizon already exists, calm as a distant note that's still part of the chord. And that thought leads, inevitably, to consciousness. If awareness is what moves through this eternal landscape, lighting each ridge in turn, what happens when it reaches the flatlands of maximum entropy? Does it go out like a candle in an airless room? Does it start again somewhere new? Or is end simply another name for a boundary our minds can't step beyond? Some thinkers imagine that consciousness follows the flow of entropy, creating ordered memories as it goes, tethered to the universe's gradient, like a leaf to the river it rides. Others turn the idea inside out and suggest that consciousness might make the gradient, that awareness itself arranges the cosmic fabric from smooth to rough, giving the arrow its lean and the story its sequence. No one knows, but even the wondering feels like part of the design. And then, just as we start to settle into that picture, the quantum world drifts in quiet, mischievous, refusing to play by classical rules. Down at the smallest scales, particles don't commit to a single location or motion until we look for them. They exist as overlapping possibilities, superpositions of many states at once. The famous double-slit experiment is like a bedtime riddle. A single particle passes through two slits simultaneously, painting an interference pattern that only makes sense if it took both paths. Yet when we ask, which slit did you choose? The pattern vanishes. The act of asking rearranges reality into a single answer. Observation, or interaction, seems to pin down one version of events from a haze of maybes. How does such behavior fit into a universe that is supposedly already fixed and complete? Does the block contain all those possibilities layered on top of each other? Or does each quantum event carve a new branch from the trunk? One answer, known as the many worlds interpretation, says the branching is real. When a quantum choice occurs, every outcome happens, but in different universes. Reality doesn't collapse, it multiplies. You see one result, another version of you sees another, and both are true within their own branches. The cosmos, in this view, is not one loaf of space-time, but an endless bakery of loaves, each with its own pattern of crumbs. It's dizzying but strangely tender. Every flicker of quantum uncertainty, every photon scattered off your skin, every neuron firing in your brain could spawn new worlds with slightly different versions of you. Some read a different book before sleep, some paused longer before speaking, some never existed because a chain of quantum chances during Earth's formation rolled the other way. The multiverse, if it's real, is less a chaos of contradictions than an infinite field of attempts, each sincere, each entire. Then the oldest question of all returns. If there are countless versions of you, which one are you? Do you exist in all of them, a pattern spread across possibilities, or only in the single line you can remember? Perhaps consciousness, again, is the navigator, selecting one path through the maze of superpositions, tracing a thread through the tangle so that experience feels singular. Or maybe you don't choose the path. Maybe the path is defined by the very act of being conscious at all, a self-consistent story written from the inside out. Quantum theory doesn't settle the matter. It only deepens the mystery of how observation and existence intertwine. But there's comfort in that mystery. The same math that predicts a particle's shy dance also builds the lasers in your phone, the circuits of your pacemaker, the lights that guide ships home at night. The strangeness works. The rules hold, even when they bend the imagination. And beneath all this, the entropy and gradients, the blocks and branches, lies the same quiet lesson as before. The universe is trustworthy in its oddness. Things flow toward disorder, but not into meaninglessness. The slope is gentle enough to live on. The uncertainty at the heart of matter doesn't erase pattern. It keeps pattern alive. Even the thought that countless worlds might bloom from every moment doesn't steal your particular one. It makes it precious, one thread glowing in a vast weave of maybes. So as you breathe now, think of yourself not as moving through time, but as part of time's texture, one small region where order briefly gathers to feel itself. Entropy increases, but within it, consciousness still hums, still arranges, still remembers. The arrow of time leans forward, yet you can rest inside its motion, unhurried. The quantum garden may blossom in infinite directions, but here, in this branch, in this moment, the air is still, and the light that holds you is dependable. The air in this branch is steady, the room unhurried, and yet another question opens like a window at night. Why is there anything it feels like to be you? Not just patterns of signals, not just muscles and reflexes moving on schedule, but an inner glow, the hum you can't point to and can't mistake. Philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness, why there is a what it's like at all, and not only a marvelous factory of information running in biological darkness. Turn that glow gently toward the block of space-time. If every physical moment of your brain already exists within the four-dimensional fabric, each neural pattern laid out like beads threaded along your world line, what gives you the sense of crossing from bead to bead? Brains can be explained as networks that integrate signals, predict, and act. They can be timed, mapped, and electrically sung too. Yet none of that tells you why there's a felt sunrise on the inside when those networks light up. If every brain state slice sits somewhere in the block, why does experience arrive as a single, continuous ribbon instead of a blizzard of all moments at once? A familiar answer says, consciousness emerges when complexity reaches a certain style of order. Billions of neurons in layered rhythms create a self-model that carries memory forward and expectation outward. The glow is what that feels like from the inside. It's a promising story, but it tiptoes past the central mystery, how experience is even possible, not just how behavior is coordinated. A melody can be notated and still leaves the fact of hearing it untouched. Another approach starts farther down, closer to the grain of existence. Panpsychism suggests that some whisper of subjectivity is woven into matter itself, the way charge and mass are woven in. Not that stones think or atoms hold opinions, but that the raw capacity for being like something is basic, and complex minds are forms that gather and organize that capacity. On this view, your brain as a four-dimensional figure in space-time is like a lens. It doesn't manufacture light from nothing. It concentrates what is already everywhere into a coherent beam. The stream you know as your life would then be a shaped flow of proto-experiences, organized by the brain's geometry and dynamics along your path through the block. A different lens comes from integrated information theory. It proposes that consciousness corresponds to how much information a system makes as a whole, beyond what its parts can make separately. Call that surplus phi. When a system is both richly differentiated and tightly knit, phi rises. The system has a unified interior. In the block picture, that unity would be a property of certain space-time patterns, configurations, whose cause and effect structure binds across both space and short stretches of time. Your felt continuity could be the subjective face of integrated information, extending along your world line. The way a flame's shape is the visible face of chemical flows. Follow that thought and the boundaries grow strange and beautiful. If consciousness is integrated information, then forms unlike us might also have interiors, though not human ones, different scales, different tempos, structures we would never notice except by their footprint in matter. Perhaps there are slow minds shaped by planetary cycles, or minds of brief blaze and vanishing in neural storms. The idea is speculative, yes. It serves not to inflate fantasy, but to loosen certainty. Experience may not be a single human tune. Push the door a little wider, and some thinkers reverse the direction entirely. Instead of treating consciousness as a product, they treat it as the ground. Cosmopsychism suggests that the cosmos is, in some fundamental way, experiential, and what we call physics is the regular public face of that interior. Space-time would not be a stage that consciousness appears on. It would be the arrangement consciousness gives itself to become shareable. The geometry would be the grammar, particles and fields, the sentences. You don't have to agree to feel the use of the picture. It offers a way to imagine why the universe is legible at all. Minds read it because mindness is in its bones. Meanwhile, the laboratory keeps our feet warm. Brains injured by stroke or disease can leave the sense of time skewed or shattered without erasing awareness itself. For some, the present swells until it floods memory's banks. For others, moments detach, like beads unstrung, events no longer locking into sequence. There are people who cannot lay down new memories, and so hover in a lighted room that never advances. There are those whose present narrows to a slit, letting in only thin slices of the world. These conditions are hard. They are also maps. They show that temporal experience depends on mechanisms that can be tuned and broken, widened and pinched. The stream that feels given is in part constructed. That does not make it fake. A window is still a view. The block perspective gives these findings a new hush. Perhaps altered states are different ways of interfacing with the already there tapestry, shifting the size of the window, changing which threads can be grasped together, lengthening or shortening the brain's integration horizon. A healthy brain may bind moments into a span long enough to feel like motion. An altered brain may bind less or more, raggedly or with unusual overlap. The world outside doesn't reorder for us. Our hold on it changes shape. And just beyond the window's frame, quantum mechanics continues its twilight dance. Some interpretations flirt with the idea that observation, maybe even conscious observation, helps select outcomes. In those stories, when a system could become many things, the act of measurement is the pivot where one story wins the right to be told. If consciousness really sways that choice, then it touches the joints of reality, not just its skin. That would place awareness at a level deeper than the block, reaching in to tag which branch becomes the lived line. Many physicists resist that step, and caution is wise. The measuring device can do the job without invoking minds. Decoherence explains how possibilities lose the ability to interfere by leaking information to their surroundings. Still, the temptation remains. Because experience is the one fact each of us has from the inside. It is natural to wonder whether the inner and the outer meet at the roots. Maybe they do not. Maybe they greet one another from neighboring rooms, trading signals but keeping their own laws. You don't have to settle the hard problem tonight. Let the competing pictures sit like books on a bedside table. Emergent minds made from neural cities, small sparks in matter braided into larger flames. Information knotted so tightly, it becomes an interior, a cosmos that is fundamentally awake and wears physics like a coat, a quantum world that either multiplies stories or quietly chooses one when touched. None of these closes the window. Each frames the same moon. What matters for this breath is the gentleness they allow. If consciousness is a lens, you can polish your lens: sleep, kindness, steady routines, so that experience passes through with fewer scratches. If consciousness is integrated information, you can simplify and connect less noise, more coherence, so the interior feels more whole. If consciousness rides an entropy gradient, you can respect your limits and refuel, remembering that order costs energy and rest returns it. If consciousness brushes the quantum, you can greet uncertainty without fear, welcoming the maybes as a fertile part of being. Notice how the body participates. A slow inhale lengthens the brain's integration window by a breath. A long exhale cools the noise. Heartbeats couple to rhythms in the cortex. Rhythms in the cortex couple to the way moments are stitched. Muscles soften and the whole instrument retunes, bringing the present into focus with a warmth that doesn't exclude the past or rush the future. Awareness is not a point, it's a room you can tidy by degrees. Sometimes a metaphor helps more than a theory. Imagine your consciousness as a lantern carried through a museum that already exists, rooms arranged in an order that makes sense from above. Down on the floor, because you are small, the tour is felt as sequence. This painting, then that sculpture, then the quiet bench by the window. You don't have to see the whole plan to belong to it. What gives peace isn't owning the building, it's trusting the light in your hand and the pace in your step. The hard problem remains hard, but its edges soften when held at human scale. The mystery is not a riddle you must conquer before you sleep. It is the warm unknown that has always been with you, the background hush behind every thought. However, the universe writes minds into its fabric, emergent or fundamental, integrated or cosmic, classical or quantum. The writing includes lullabies. It includes nights when you set the questions down like stones and feel the earth support them. Let the breath arrive again, then leave. Somewhere in the brain, billions of tiny gates open and close in sympathy, each a flicker, each a vote for continuity. Somewhere else, memories knit themselves into cleaner seams. Somewhere deeper, the low machinery of metabolism keeps the lights on. The mystery doesn't interrupt this work, it consecrates it. You are the place where the fabric wakes up to itself for a while and says, I am here. That is enough. The arrow leans forward. The garden of possibilities hums. In this room, in this branch, the air is still, and the light that holds you remains dependable. If the world is a finished fabric and we are the place where it feels itself, what becomes of choosing? Breakfast choices, life partners, promises made and kept so ordinary and yet so heavy. You feel the weight of deciding because you feel the pull of futures that seem open. You hesitate, compare, commit, That lived sensation is not a decoration. It is central to what it means to be someone. Now imagine that the whole of your life is a continuous figure running through space-time, a long, luminous thread with bends and crossings already stitched in. On that picture, the decision you make next week exists the way a mountain exists before a hiker reaches it. The trail is there from above. The turn is part of the route. From the ground, you still come to the fork, breathe, and step. This is where the tension hides. A fixed route, and yet a genuine pause. It sounds like a trick until you realize the pause is part of the route. The world line, without your hesitation, would be a different shape. Some call this compatibilism, though a whisper of philosophy is enough for tonight. Freedom, on this softer view, does not mean magic disobedience to physics. It means that what you do flows from who you are, your reasons, affections, memories, and hopes, all of which are themselves woven into the same fabric. A choice is free when it expresses the character you endorse after reflection, even if that character has a history. The fact that your deliberation is a physical process does not make it counterfeit. It makes it anchored. A violin sound is not less music because wood and string obey acoustics. Think of a story you love. You return to it knowing each scene, and still the hero's uncertainty rings true. The plot's certainty does not erase the reality of the character's struggle. It frames it. On your 10th viewing, you watch the same brow furrow, the same breath draw, the same resolve harden, and you feel the meaning in it. The character's agency is real inside the story's logic. Similarly, your agency is real inside the logic of your world line. The act of weighing is not superfluous. It is one of the world line's features. From above, the arc displays a decision. From within, the decision takes work. Identity widens here. Are you the entire four-dimensional figure, birth to death, in one continuous sculpture? Or are you the attention that touches each cross-section in turn? Either way, growth becomes geometry. What you call learning from mistakes is the fact that later regions of the sculpture include traces, new pathways, and weights etched by earlier regions. The adult who forgives is not a different substance than the child who held too tightly. They are parts of the same figure, the later region carrying new curves carved by experience. Personal change is the pattern of those curves, not a substance leaking from one container to another. Moral life looks different and somehow kinder in this light. A harmful act lives in the block. Yes, so do remorse, apology, repair. Responsibility doesn't evaporate under determination. It clarifies. Praise and blame track whether an action expresses the person's settled or endorsed character, whether it fits the reasons they can own upon reflection. When you help, the help is praiseworthy, even if it was always going to happen, because it is part of who you are in that pattern, a manifestation of compassion that belongs to you. When you harm and then change, the change is not a tacked-on miracle. It is another region of the same figure where new lines have been drawn. Quantum branching adds an extra room to this house of thought. If reality splits whenever tiny events admit more than one outcome, then there are versions of you scattered across a great orchard of timelines, each carrying forward with slightly different weather. From the view in one branch, your path may be set. Across the orchard, the set includes many paths. Some people imagine freedom living at this larger scale, as if the act of choosing is the act of finding yourself in one bough rather than another. It's a gentle metaphor, not a proof. Still, it carries a certain comfort. The line you inhabit is a sincere telling among many possible tellings, and sincerity matters. Others go further and suggest that consciousness leans on the quantum in a more intimate way, nudging which outcomes become your experience. Perhaps that is too generous to mind. Perhaps the environment's quiet gossip decoherence does the selecting, with no privileged role for awareness. Either way, the life you feel is a single thread through a thicket of maybes, and you travel it with the tools you have: memory, attention, care. It helps to come back to the simple human picture. You face choices with limited knowledge and real stakes. You sleep on it, ask for counsel, list pros and cons, listen for the small voice that is not fear. None of that becomes theater just because a cosmic map exists. The map includes the listening. In fact, omitting your careful pause would make it a different map. Agency is not the power to float outside causality. It is the art of being a certain kind of cause. There is a gentler radicalism, too. What if consciousness is not a latecomer, but part of the ground? If awareness is woven into reality at a fundamental level, then the block might be a pattern inside awareness rather than the other way around. From the inside-out view, what appears as fixed space-time is the grammar of a living mind, arranging experience for coherence and shareability. From the outside-in view, the same arrangement looks like a determined structure. The two readings need not fight. One is how it feels to author. The other is how authorship looks from the library's balcony. None of this cancels uncertainty at human scale. You still do not know how tomorrow's conversation will unfold. You still prepare, still choose words, still adapt. Uncertainty is the local weather of limited perspective. Freedom is how you sail under that weather with the character you've spent years shaping. Honest regret remains useful. It helps tune the instrument. Gratitude remains possible. It reminds you that so much of your figure was composed by gifts, teachers, friends, strangers who held a door when you did not yet deserve it. This perspective softens the urge to stage life as a duel between fate and rebellion. The duel burns energy you could use for gentler work. Consider instead a craftsman's patience. Grain runs a certain way in wood. Fighting it splinters the board. Learning the grain lets you curve the cut without breaking it. A world with grain can still host artistry. Your preferences, reasons, and vows are the tools that shape how the grain shows in your piece. Sometimes people worry that if everything is written, love loses its meaning. That worry misunderstands love. Love is not valuable because it happens in a vacuum of causation. Love is valuable because it names a pattern of attention and action resilient under pressure, showing up, listening honestly, protecting what's fragile, telling the truth without sting. If those patterns are woven into the block, their worth is not reduced. A sunrise is not less beautiful because the laws that make it were in place before the first light touched your window. And what of guilt, apology, forgiveness? In the block view, they are not moral theater after the fact. They are integral features of the same world line. A harmful act calls to later regions to balance it, and sometimes they answer. Sometimes they fail to, and that failure is part of the truth we tell about ourselves. Responsibility is not the fantasy that we could have been other creatures with other histories. Responsibility is the willingness to acknowledge what our actions express about who we are, and to participate honestly in shaping the later regions of the figure so they answer the earlier ones with more wisdom. Stand quietly inside that. The world remains trustworthy in its strangeness, and your place in it is not an accident roaming free of consequence. You are authored, and you are authoring. You are sculpted, and you sculpt. Breakfast will still need choosing. A friend will still need a call. A small kindness will still be available and still be yours to perform. None of this survives scrutiny as an illusion. It survives as the very substance of a life. Notice how steady things become when you grant both truths. The fabric is whole, and the experience of moving across it is real. The paradox softens into a practice. Spend your attention like a lantern, not a floodlight. Keep reasons tidy enough to trust them. Keep habits warm enough to serve you when energy runs low. When a fork appears, breathe. Check the instruments, memory, principle, care, and step. If the map always included that step, it included your care in taking it. Somewhere in that care lies the quiet proof that agency matters. It matters not because the future is a blank awaiting your pen, but because you are the pen's motion and the ink's color. You carry a style of line that is recognizably yours, firm in some places, playful in others, capable of correcting itself without tearing the page. The universe can hold that line without strain. Across centuries, people have sat with the same unease and the same wonder, sensing that the way time feels may not be how time is. The surprise isn't that these questions are old, it's how often they rhyme. Modern physics presses its ear to equations and instruments and hears an echo of insights that once came from meditation mats, desert cells, candlelit courts of philosophy. In one corner of the ancient Mediterranean, the Stoics tried to live inside a cosmos they believed to be rational all the way down. The word they leaned on was logos, an ordering principle, a grammar for reality. Within that grammar, events unfold with a necessity that's not cruel, just consistent. A drought, a letter arriving late, a chance meeting by a city gate, already part of the sentence. Yet the Stoics didn't abandon agency. They drew a line between what can be controlled and what cannot, placing character on the near side. The world's structure might be fixed. Your response is yours. That small, durable distinction looks a lot like the compatibilist heartbeat inside modern debates about a block universe structure without fatalism, responsibility without magic. Farther east, Sanskrit carried a spectrum of time in a single word: kala, chronological time, seasonal time, and timeless time, folded together. In the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna falters on the threshold of battle, Krishna unveils a vision not meant for ordinary eyes, an everywhere form in which all moments coexist: births and endings, victories and griefs, each illuminated at once, as if the page had been turned to reveal the full score. The terror Arjuna feels doesn't come from gore. It comes from seeing sequence collapse into completeness. The moment he stands in hasn't lost its importance. It has gained an unsettling transparency. Buddhist thinkers approach time by refusing to let anything stand alone. Dependent origination says that phenomena arise together in networks of causes and conditions that fan out without a first link. No event is a bead on an isolated thread. Each is a joint where many strands meet. Experience, on this view, is a process with no single clock at its core. Beginningless time is a way of saying that explanations don't terminate in a privileged moment. The resemblance to four-dimensional space-time is not perfect, but the kinship is there. Relations have priority. Context is king. And what looks like a before and after becomes a geometry of connection. Mystics, meanwhile, have reported a kind of weather of the mind, an eternal now, in which the calendar recedes, and what remains is a single, bright present that somehow includes all seasons. Meister Eckhart wrote about the birth of the divine in the soul as an event outside the clock. Sufi writers spoke of waqt, the time proper to a seeker's station, where past and future thin to translucence. Ibn Arabi said creation is an eternal relation, not a once-upon-a-time event, closer to a verb held continuously than a noun that happened and is over. Read generously. These accounts aren't claims about physics, but about what consciousness can taste when its noise quiets, a perspective in which unfolding looks like a facet of something already whole. Cyclical time adds a different rhythm. Hindu cosmology sketches eons that bloom and dissolve, ages stacked like nested shells, universes inhaled and exhaled. Endings lose their sharpness when they belong to a pattern that repeats. Nietzsche, a very different spirit, proposed eternal recurrence as a thought experiment with teeth. Could you live so that you would affirm the exact life you've lived, again and again, without remainder? Whatever one thinks of the metaphysics, the ethical challenge lands with force. If the block universe is a kind of eternal presence of every moment, recurrence becomes less a circle and more a property of standing outside sequence at all. Modern philosophy tracks another tension that refuses to be domesticated. Thomas Nagel's phrase, "the view from nowhere," names the scientific stance that treats all events as coordinates in a single descriptive structure. Against it stands the subjective view from somewhere, the felt center where choice, value, and sorrow arrive. Neither cancels the other. The friction between them is the felt texture of a life lived under the dome of a sky that stars do not bother to explain. Theology has rehearsed similar questions for a long time. If an omniscient mind knows every future detail, are those details still open? Traditions bend in different directions to protect both divine knowledge and human responsibility. Translate omniscience into the physics of a block universe, and the puzzle becomes secular. If all moments of your world line exist, what does it mean to pray, to repent, to take a vow? One reply has always been practical. It means exactly what it seems to mean from inside the moment, where vows bind and remorse repairs. Another reply is structural. The vow is itself one of the block's features, a hinge on which later regions swing. Advaita Vedanta edges the conversation farther. Ultimate reality Brahman is beyond change and time, and the world of change is Maya, not mere illusion in the cheap sense, but appearance, a presentation filtered by mind and sense. The comparison with a static space-time dressed in the garments of temporal flow is suggestive. In both, what seems to be motion may be a manner of seeing. The deeper thing is undisturbed. Yet the differences matter too. Advaita's claim is metaphysical and soteriological, aimed at liberation. Physics aims at measurement and prediction, indifferent to salvation. What stands out is not that ancient and modern say the same thing they don't, but that they circle the same mystery. Temporal experience feels less foundational the closer one looks. Mystical reports are first person, saturated with value and transformation. Physics is third person, sparse and exact. When their silhouettes overlap, the moment is not a proof. It is a prompt to careful delight. Humility grows naturally here. Every time humans have believed they'd cornered reality with a neat idea, the next century asked awkward questions. It turned out that light behaves like both wave and particle. It turned out that simultaneity depends on how you move. It turned out that empty space seethes with fields, and that the universe is expanding so smoothly that distant galaxies slip beyond causal reach, carried by the growth of the fabric itself. These are not metaphors. They are measurements, that forced metaphors, to learn new steps. Quantum mechanics trades everyday intuition for a calculus that predicts with outrageous accuracy. What is a tunneling particle really doing? The language we have is statistical, and the picture we keep is provisional. General relativity gives a geometry so persuasive that clocks disagree near mountains and satellites need gentle corrections to keep our maps honest. The strange is dependable. The dependable remains strange. If the block universe is a step toward clarity, it may also be a scaffolding for something stranger that still fits the data when we have better questions. On the human side of the glass, these grand themes settle into small practices. If time's river is partly a feature of how experience integrates, then whichever traditions have taught stillness, breath, attention, we're training an instrument to hear more of the score at once. If the arrow aligns with entropy, then habits that conserve order, sleep, nourishment, kindness are not moral ornaments, but thermodynamic wisdom scaled to a kitchen and a commute. If identity is a four-dimensional shape, then journaling, apology, and promise are not antiques. They are ways of stitching coherence across slices that can't be held all at once. Even the old worry about foreknowledge begins to soften when recast as care. Suppose the future does not need you to rescue it from being fixed. Suppose it needs you to inhabit it faithfully, so that the region where you stand is thick with the values you've affirmed. Patience when it would be easy to flare, generosity when it would be easy to clutch, curiosity when it would be easy to judge. Those thicknesses are part of the structure too. In the picture from nowhere, they are patterns. In the view from somewhere, they are the essence of being a person. The convergence of physics with older wisdom does not license lazy equations. Krishna is not a tensor field. Minkowski did not teach meditation, but the resonance can be used gently. It can remind you that the first time a human being felt time open and widen was not in a lecture hall. It was under a sky, in a temple, in a quiet room with a single candle. Long before spectral lines and satellite clocks, the awe was already there. And awe remains a useful teacher because awe tolerates not knowing without fleeing to nonsense. There is a final, bracing possibility that even our best pictures are still silhouettes cast by a structure we're not equipped to grasp directly. That does not make the pictures worthless. It makes them compassionate. They give us enough truth to navigate, enough precision to build, enough surprise to keep us honest. They also leave room for the interpersonal truths that equations do not reach. That forgiveness can rehabilitate a memory. That grief can preserve love without clinging. That beauty can arrive in a cracked bowl and a winter sun, both. Imagine a map that stops where the paper ends, and beyond it, the land continues. Scientists extend the paper. Contemplatives practice how to walk the edge without assuming the missing region is either a cliff or a paradise. Both are needed. The expansion of the known keeps our ships from wrecking on superstition. The cultivation of attention keeps our cabins humane during long voyages between stars we'll never touch. Through all of this runs a steady thread. Choice retains its meaning even when certainty about metaphysics does not. You can choose a slower reply. You can choose to read one more page aloud to someone who is tired. You can choose to notice when the mind is painting a future in unnecessarily harsh colors and soften the stroke. If the universe is a block, those choices are contours of the block. If the universe is a bloom of branching worlds, those choices are the path you inhabit through the thicket. If consciousness is fundamental, those choices are the way the ground speaks itself. Ancient voices would not be shocked by that conclusion. The Stoic would call it living according to nature. The Buddhist would call it wise compassion. The Vedantin would say it is remembering what you are. The mystic would shrug and talk about an eternal now that has always made room for cups of tea and quiet work. The physicist would nod toward a graph, tap an equation, and smile at the stubborn fact that corrections for time dilation keep the GPS pins right where we left them. Tea cools in its cup, equations glow faintly on the whiteboard, and something more audacious steps into the room: the suspicion that our whole way of framing time, space, mind, and what is real might itself be a kind of training wheel. Future readers may smile at our earnest diagrams the way we smile at medieval star maps, admiring the courage, seeing the beauty, and sensing how much terrain still waits off the edge of the paper. One path begins by turning the block idea inside out. Instead of consciousness traveling through a finished four-dimensional quilt, imagine consciousness as the loom that produces the quilt in the first place, an organizing act that renders experience navigable. Space-time, on this view, is like an interface, not a deceit, but a simplified surface that living minds can use, a dashboard distilled from something richer and multidimensional behind it. Interfaces hide complexity to enable action. A map omits trees to reveal routes. Perhaps space-time omits deeper structure to reveal cause and effect. Meanwhile, the frontier of physics keeps offering metaphors that don't wait for permission. String theory sketches extra dimensions curling like small, hidden corridors, 11 in some tellings, each contributing to the harmony that becomes the world we feel. Holographic ideas whisper that a region's contents might be faithfully encoded on its boundary, the way a two-dimensional film can project a vivid volume of light and depth. The mathematics of black holes, with their careful accounting of information, nudges us toward a universe where what matters most is not substance, but description bits instead of bricks. John Wheeler's playful arrow points the same way. It from bit, reality from information, events as answerable, yes, no, distinctions stacking up into mountains. If information sits at the base, then consciousness might not be a late result of complicated information processing. It might be what information is like from the inside. The block could be a data structure within awareness, rather than a physical bin that awareness rides through. Experience then becomes the self-presentation of organized information, and the qualities we notice, color, warmth, memory, are not paint on top, but facets through which information meets itself. Push further, and a bolder picture appears. Computation, not as a metaphor for nature, but as nature's fabric. Not, we are inside someone's desktop, which is a narrow fantasy, but the universe's lawful unfolding is a form of computation, where rules are update steps and states evolve, like lines of code executing in parallel. Flow would then be what update feels like from within. The laws we carve into symbols would be the program's grammar. Your particular life would be a subroutine with its own local variables, calling and being called, folding outputs into new inputs in a long, stable dance. The simulation hypothesis is a cousin to that thought, but wanders in a different garden. If minds can simulate worlds, and if they do, then most minds might live in simulations. The problem with this story at bedtime is that it turns meaning into a supervision question. Who runs this? Why? For what grade? Another angle puts the anxiety back on the shelf. If consciousness is fundamental, the real versus simulated distinction might dissolve. Both would be manners of presentation within mind. Two ways awareness renders structure to itself. Value would not be shaved away by being virtual, any more than a true kindness loses weight because neurons, not angels, carried it to your hands. Neuroscience quietly strengthens these reversals. Brains don't record, they infer. They predict and revise, blending noisy inputs with learned models to build scenes that are good enough to survive by. Perception is controlled hallucination, corrected by error signals. The stability you feel in a room, the persistence of a chair, the continuity of a friend's face arrives from an active construction project in cortex and thalamus, not a passive display. This doesn't make reality optional. It makes experience participatory. Time's flow, in this light, looks like a style of inference, the mind's best strategy for keeping models aligned with a world whose hidden causes change in regular ways. Philosophy anticipated this in a different dialect. Kant's careful distinction between things as they are in themselves and things as they appear through our cognitive lenses reads like a weather report from the same coast. He doubted we could know the coastline directly. Physics refuses that resignation. Relativity, quantum theory, and their unlikely agreements with experiment serve as translation devices. We don't see space-time curvature or complex amplitudes. We write equations that let us successfully act as if those invisible structures govern what becomes measurable. The math is not the thing in itself, but it may be a faithful transcript of aspects our senses were never built to register. Humility follows naturally. The block universe could be a very good approximation to something even wider. Maybe time is emergent from a deeper combinatorial order, a macroscopic smoothness that appears when vast numbers of microscopic updates average out. Maybe locality, the idea that only nearby things directly affect us, is a convenience, and entanglement is the truer stitch, with near and far being interface concepts. Minds need to stay sane. Every breakthrough to date has announced two facts at once: that reality is stranger than intuition, and that the strangeness can be trusted to keep its own rules. Trust matters because there's living to do inside these possibilities. If consciousness shapes the interface, then practices that refine attention, sleep, breath, gentle curiosity are not spiritual luxuries. They are interface hygiene, keeping prediction loops from latching onto noise. If information is fundamental, then honesty is a physics. Accurate encoding, minimal distortion, reversible transformations where possible. If computation lies at the base, then compassion is a resource allocation, time, energy, and care directed to processes that reduce suffering and increase coherence. Meaning under eternalism often looks like a paradox that won't stop smiling. If your life is already whole, Why does it feel uncompleted from inside? Indexicality is a mouthful that answers with simple kindness. Experience is always from somewhere. All places on a globe exist at once. Standing in one, other places remain over the horizon. That doesn't make them unreal. It limits access. Temporal location works the same way. Future regions of your world line are as present in the block as past ones, but evidence flows to you on causal channels that point one way. Uncertainty is not a defect. It is the local name we give to the boundary of what can be known from here. That boundary shapes courage. Plans matter precisely because you can't consult the whole map. Vows matter because they bind you to patterns you endorse without knowing every consequence in advance. Work matters because outputs today become inputs tomorrow, along lines you can only partly trace. The practice is to choose with care, and then inhabit the chosen path with attention, revising when feedback arrives. None of this loses seriousness because some larger description says the path was always part of the figure. The seriousness is one of its coordinates. Even ethics, that practical art of living with others, gains a fresh angle. If worlds are informational, lies are entropy generators, local increases in disorder that others must spend energy to counteract. If minds are predictive engines, cruelty poisons the data they run on. Fear skews priors and narrows hypotheses, making whole communities less able to model and adapt. If the self is a four-dimensional sculpture, then small, steady acts of care are load-bearing beams. When the sculpture includes regret and repair, it grows not by erasing earlier regions, but by knitting them into a pattern that can carry weight without cracking. Speculations about extra dimensions, holography, and cosmic computation might sound like distractions, yet at scale, they behave like the lull of waves, background rhythms within which daily life sets its own beat. You still write letters, reply to texts, return library books, feed a cat who thinks you are a dispensary with legs. You still admire a friend who listens without waiting to speak. These tiny fidelities are not footnotes to metaphysics. They are the ground where any metaphysics shows its worth. There is also the irreducible fact that awareness is happening. Even if the categories we use, time, space, cause, thing, turn out to be conveniences, the presence of experience does not need their permission. I am is not an argument. It is the one given. From that given, every picture of reality must explain how experience fits, not explain it away. Whether minds move through a block, help generate it, or ride the crest of some deeper informational ocean, their felt life is the anchor. You are not a spectator outside the show. You are a line in the script and the warmth of the theater and the breath in the actor's throat all at once. How to live, then, if the universe is timeless? One answer is to lean into craft. Craft does not ask whether wood is ultimately particulate or wave-like. It learns the grain and shapes with it. Learn the grain of your attention. Notice when prediction runs ahead of evidence and slows your compassion. Notice when a familiar story about someone else's motives collapses into a simpler one. They were tired. In a block, or a branching orchard, or a computational sea, kindness remains portable. It requires no final theory to be well aimed. Another answer is to widen what counts as success. If time's arrow is an entropy gradient, then progress is not a triumph over drift, but the art of creating pockets of order that pay their own energy bills. Gardens, libraries, friendships, arguments that clarify rather than scorch. These are temporary by design and valuable because of it. Their worth is not diminished by the fact that the fabric will carry them forward into quieter regions someday. Their worth is to be the warmth that makes the quieter regions possible. There is a temptation to rank realities: base versus sim, hardware versus software, matter versus mind. The ranking rarely helps. Better to ask what each framing makes possible. The informational lens prods us to steward signals carefully. The interface lens encourages humility about what experience leaves out, and gratitude for what it reveals. The block lens teaches patience and responsibility. The quantum lens trains comfort with ambiguity that is principled, not sloppy. The consciousness first lens keeps the door open for value and meaning to be basic, not accidents. If the next century brings a theory that nests all these into a single, clean mathematics, the human task will still look familiar. Keep the instruments calibrated. Sleep enough to dream. Move enough to feel your edges. Eat in ways that don't turn your body into a stalled algorithm. Keep the language honest. Say what you mean without extra ornament, where precision would be kinder. Keep the circle porous. Let people in who can revise you without erasing you. Picture, for a moment, an interface you didn't know you needed. A calm display where time is drawn not as a line, but as a garden plan. Beds already laid out, some still empty, others thick with leaf. Paths you've walked darkened slightly. Paths ahead are penciled, not inked, their edges smudged by uncertainty. Somewhere on the map is a bench with your initials carved in it, though you haven't been there yet. You stand with the paper in hand, not omniscient, not helpless, and decide which path to walk before the light fades a little more. A physicist might say the bench exists whether or not you ever choose that route. A mystic might say the bench and the walker are the same awareness noticing itself under two names. A poet might say the bench appears the first time a mind loves the idea of resting there. Whatever the right cosmology, the choosing has texture, the moment has a feel. The body knows the difference between drifting and committing, and that knowledge is not trivial, even if someone can redescribe it as a path on a manifold. Perhaps the most heartening possibility is that future theories will confirm something we already live as a daily fact. Meaning is not an afterthought. It is not an emergent trick of primate brains on a meaningless stage. It is the orientation by which experience organizes itself into a world that can be shared. The laws may be the same in every corner of the cosmos, but meanings are local and relational, and miracle enough communicable. You carry them the way migratory birds carry roots, written in a sky they cannot read, and somehow they arrive. Meaning travels well because it rides on relation, but relation also carries weight, agency, responsibility, purpose. The tangle tightens when you imagine the whole of life already present in space-time. If the story is complete, who deserves credit for the bright chapters, and who carries blame for the dark ones? If growth is already woven into your four-dimensional shape, does effort still matter, or is striving only a costume worn by a sculpture that cannot truly move? One way to loosen the knot is modest and durable. Measure freedom not by hypothetical rewrites, but by authorship. A choice is yours when it arises from reasons you could endorse if you pause to look at them, when it expresses your settled cares rather than fear, confusion, or coercion. The fact that those reasons, cares, And reflections are also part of the same space-time figure. Doesn't dilute them, it grounds them. Compassion remains compassion, even if it is old as the universe. Curiosity remains curiosity, even if it is stitched from beginning to end. When you reach for a hand, encouragement doesn't become less real because the reaching was always there. It becomes part of the architecture that holds two people up. Seen this way, meaning doesn't depend on a future that could have gone otherwise. Meaning depends on expression. A decision is meaningful when it embodies values you recognize as your own, and when it integrates new information honestly into the pattern you live by. Even within a completed geometry, encounter remains real. The moment you learn a skill, or apologize without defensiveness, or understand a point you once resisted, is not just a position on a map. It is experience connecting with information and making a new contour in the interior life that only you can feel. Personal development also looks different from this vantage. Instead of picturing yourself changing substance over time, imagine a single figure whose early and late regions differ because later regions contain echoes and traces from earlier ones. The same person who faces a challenge is the person who will later be known for meeting it. These are not two separate beings. They are neighboring rooms in one house. The passage between them is what you call perseverance, but in the geometry it is simply another hallway you inhabit fully when you toil and rest, doubt, and try again. This perspective can even soften hard seasons. If the story is whole, then pain is not an orphaned exception. It is a necessary chord within the full harmony. That doesn't romanticize suffering or excuse cruelty. It does grant that confusion and failure can be load-bearing beams in the structure of a life that eventually supports others. The worst night in memory and the skill that later helped you guide a friend through their own worst night are not separate stories. They are adjacent. The seam matters. Some find comfort here. If the book is complete, every cliffhanger already has its landing. Every winter already holds the first thaw. Every joy is still bright somewhere in the quilt. Others bristle, fearing that permanence steals urgency. Why practice? Why repair? Why create? If the outcome is fixed, the answer is hidden in the premise. The future is fixed, in part by the very practice, repair, and creation you will authentically perform. The world line without your effort would be a different world line. Predetermination here is not a foreign hand forcing events. It is the form your own hand takes, seen from above. This flips the usual worry on its head. Far from reducing significance, eternal inscription raises the stakes. In a purely flowing timeline, actions fade like footprints in surf. In a block, actions endure as features in the terrain. A kindness is not merely a good ripple. It is a ridge that will always be there. A betrayal is not merely a bad day. It is a scar the figure carries. That permanence is not a threat if you remember that repair, reconciliation, and renewed fidelity are also permanent. The scar can be crossed by bridges that are themselves enduring parts of the landscape. Living with this view invites a shift in posture. Instead of trying to drag an incomplete present toward some imagined completion, you enact completion by inhabiting the present thoroughly. You still set goals, of course. You still plan and build. But the engine isn't a frantic push against absence. It is an attentive participation in a form that is already rich enough to deserve your best workmanship. The journey does not lose savor because the destination exists. The savor is part of the destination's definition. Far from draining engagement, this can intensify it. If moments do not evaporate but are woven in for good, then attention becomes a kind of craftsmanship, not a luxury. The way you speak in this conversation will always be how you spoke. The care you bring to a task becomes part of the task's permanent contour. Even ordinary scenes acquire a delicate gravity, not heaviness, clarity. The mundane is where permanence hides in plain sight. This is not a prescription for passivity. The fact that the pattern is complete does not relieve you from participation in completing it. Consciousness, after all, is the place where the pattern becomes felt. You are the locale where effort happens, where values become verbs, where a plan becomes a call that actually gets made. If the outcome is written, the writing includes the muscle and thought and warmth you spend to reach it. That expenditure is not an illusion. It is the lived content of the very line an external description would draw. Practically, the shift shows up in small ways. Feedback becomes something to welcome, not because it changes the cosmic manuscript, but because it is the means by which the manuscript's later pages incorporate wisdom from earlier ones. Habit becomes precious, not because it enslaves you, but because sturdy routines lower the metabolic cost of doing the right thing when attention is thin. Forgiveness retains its power, not by erasing a fixed past, but by reweaving future regions so that the past has companions strong enough to hold it without breaking. Gratitude remains sane because it acknowledges the gifts that shape the pattern you carry. There is still room for the sting of regret, and it has a dignified job. Regret is the mind's way of honoring the mismatch between what a region expresses and what you would choose to express now. It directs energy toward repairs that can become new material later. Regret does not rewrite the earlier scene, but it can design the staging around it so that meaning changes. The same event, seen from within a later architecture of reconciliation, becomes a tutor rather than a tyrant. Anxiety about the fixed future softens when you remember that knowledge travels causally. From this point along your path, the future remains hidden the way a valley remains hidden from a ridge. Not knowing is not a flaw, it is geometry. Courage is how you move anyway, guided by values and by the best models you can afford to hold. On the day the path crests and more of the valley becomes visible, you will not be surprised that it existed. You will be grateful for the steps that got you to the overlook. This approach is not unique to philosophy. You practice it whenever you read a finished novel slowly, savoring pages you could skip to the end to confirm. You live it when you perform music from a complete score, shaping phrases that already exist but do not yet sound until breath and bow give them body. You embody it when you care for a garden in which autumn is guaranteed. You still water, still prune, still harvest, because tending is the worth, not the illusion. Skeptics will still ask, if I cannot do otherwise, why should I act? The response is gentle, because who you are is not separable from what you do. Action is the format of character. If you are the sort of person who cares for the vulnerable, the caring is not an optional flourish. It is the definition. Remove the verb and the noun dissolves. In a block view, should is not a threat from elsewhere. It is a pointer to the region you would recognize as faithful if you could see the whole. There's a quiet mercy in viewing life this way. Struggle is no longer evidence that you are failing to reach a moving target. It is how the pattern manifests its depth at the point where you stand. Work is no longer a desperate sprint to catch a receding horizon. It is a way of inhabiting a horizon you are already part of. Responsibility becomes less about impressing an invisible judge and more about aligning with the best version of your line that you can presently see, and steadily widening that vision through learning and love. All of this understates the obvious. Experience remains temporal for us. We wake, act, rest. We tell stories with beginnings and ends. We hold hands at hospital beds, where sequence matters a breath, then another, then none. No theory can or should bleach the color from those hours. Instead, the theory can serve as a frame that protects their color from panic and nihilism. Your choices matter because they are how meaning enters the world at your coordinates. They are how values become visible in the only format reality ever uses for values: action and attention. As understanding of time deepens, a dual capacity may take shape, one that doesn't force a choice between the peace of eternity and the urgency of the clock. You can cultivate a steady horizon sense that everything has its place in the whole, while retaining a vivid, merciful urgency about what is before you. This dual awareness does not hover above life, it pours through it. It is a way to avoid the twin illusions that only frantic progress gives life value, or that only serene detachment protects it from pain. Whether such a posture can be learned widely is an open question. What can be said with confidence is simpler. Awareness is plastic. Minds train. Attention stabilizes with practice. Communities teach one another how to hold grief without letting go of laughter, how to sustain effort without turning it into self-punishment, how to honor vows without hardening into brittle certainty. If you have ever changed your mind and felt larger rather than smaller afterward, you have proof that consciousness is not a fixed lens, but a lens that can be polished, widened, and shared. From that plasticity, the frontier looks different. Minds that can be trained become instruments that hear farther, and what they pick up is already reshaping how we picture time, causality, and experience. The questions we've been carrying about flow versus stillness, agency inside a finished tapestry, are not only night thoughts, they're entering lab notebooks, telescope logs, and code, coming back with data clinging to them like pollen. In laser-quiet rooms, physicists keep testing sequence itself. Carefully arranged experiments probe whether choices made later can constrain what must have been true earlier, pressing on the seams of causality to see how the fabric stretches without tearing. The goal isn't to enthrone paradox. It's to map the lawful limits of our intuitions about before and after. Even when classical order holds, the boundary lines move, and our picture of time gains new contour. Entanglement remains the patient tutor. Two particles prepared together behave as one system across great distance, correlations arriving like a bell's tone through fog. Space doesn't get a vote. Neither, apparently, does ordinary time. This does not mean signals outrun light. It does suggest that the separations our senses rely on may belong to the interface of experience rather than to the deepest layer of reality. If distance and delay are our way of managing complexity, entanglement hints at a substrate where near and far are different questions. On cosmic scales, space-time has begun to sing audibly. Gravitational wave detectors, immense rulers made of light, have felt black holes merge and neutron stars collide. Each detection is both a letter from a violent past and a test of geometry's rules. As instruments sharpen, they will listen for stranger motifs, the frame dragging near, fast-spinning holes, where space and time trade roles in ways our metaphors struggle to follow. The strangeness is disciplined, and that discipline is oddly comforting. Neuroscience, meanwhile, maps the scaffolding of temporal experience. Thalamic pacers and cortical rhythms set the integration window within which sight, sound, and touch become a single now. When injury or illness alters those rhythms, time's field changes, windows widen or narrow, sequences smear or sharpen. These findings don't shrink consciousness to machinery. They give us levers for kindness, therapies that restore a person's sense of before and after so they can inhabit their own story again. Some researchers ask whether biology shelters tiny islands of quantum coherence. Others argue that warm, noisy brains are well explained by classical dynamics and predictive coding. The more important agreement is humility. Whatever subjective time is, it's not naive. It's a constructed achievement, and constructions can be tuned by breath and attention, and perhaps by future technologies that will feel ordinary to our grandchildren. Artificial systems offer a different mirror. As machine intelligence learns to track long-range dependencies, holding many possible futures in working memory, updating them as evidence arrives, we gain a lab for temporal modeling that doesn't tire or suffer. If a model keeps parallel timelines in play, what would that feel like from the inside, if there is an inside? If a system can compress months into minutes without losing structure, what is the rate of now for such a mind? These are not invitations to anthropomorphize. They help isolate which aspects of time feeling belong to any predictive architecture and which belong to bodies that ache, heal, and age. Cosmology remains bold. Observations of cosmic expansion, dark energies push, and the clustering of galaxies refine the universe's likely fate. Heat death stays the quiet favorite. Distinctions dilute, gradients flatten, work grows scarce. Yet cyclic and bouncing scenarios remain in play, and new data can be impolite. Whatever the finale, the rehearsal is instructive. If time's arrow is tied to entropy, beginnings are precious because they seed histories. Our lives are local versions of that principle. We build small pockets where order grows because care is applied steadily. At the other extreme, quantum gravity suggests that space-time may not be fundamental at all. It might emerge from patterns of entanglement or from algebraic relations that only look like geometry at larger scales. If space and time are products rather than ingredients, the block we've discussed is a superb interface, faithful, useful, and high level. Behind it could lie a web of relations that resembles logic more than fabric. Holographic ideas deepen this suspicion. What we call inside may be information written on a boundary we did not know to look for. Information sits at the crossroads. Black hole puzzles have forced us to treat information conservation as sacred, even when matter behaves like a stage magician. The working lesson is that disappearance is costly or forbidden. What goes in must be accounted for, perhaps in scrambled form. If information is what never quite dies, then mind, the generator and steward of structured information, cannot be an afterthought. Even if consciousness isn't fundamental, it may sit closer to the foundations than our old hierarchies allowed. Conversations across traditions have grown more specific. Contemplative science, doesn't treat meditation as mystic garnish. It measures how trained attention can widen or thin the felt present and mute prediction noise long enough to notice the world with fewer overlays. Reports of timelessness aren't oracles. They're data with neural signatures. None of this proves a metaphysic. It does expand the repertoire of human time experience, making the block picture feel less alien by teaching people gently to sense more of the page at once. The line between tool and companion blurs as interfaces become intimate. Early brain computer systems already modulate sensory throughput and motor intention. With care, subtler tuning may arrive, widening the binding window that fuses signals into a present, altering the grain of memory encoding, letting a person rehearse futures with less emotional cost and more informational clarity. These possibilities demand ethics that are not naive about power or markets. Handled well, they will let us test how flexible time feeling really is. Virtual and augmented realities are everyday cousins of these profound interventions. Well-designed experiences can stretch minutes into felt hours or compress hours into minutes by shaping novelty, feedback, and narrative arc. The goal need not be escape. It can be training, teaching nervous systems to remain steady when the world speeds up and to stay awake without hypervigilance when the world slows down. Therapies for trauma and chronic pain already use such tricks, nudging prediction loops toward gentler equilibria. All of this ripples outward. If people learn that time sense is a skill, schools can teach temporal literacy, distinguishing urgent from merely loud, building plans that survive contact with reality, resting before collapse. Courts can recognize the neuroscience of impulse without excusing harm, aiming consequences at reshaping future regions of a life rather than at spectacle. Workplaces can stop pretending attention is infinite and align tasks with human rhythms instead of forcing humans to imitate machines. Spirituality shifts without vanishing. When communities mark seasons and losses, they aren't only keeping culture, they're synchronizing clocks in the most humane sense, aligning expectations and memories so shared meaning remains coherent under entropy. Rituals that say this was important or this will be hard are social error correction, preserving signal amidst noise. In a block universe, they are as real as any star. In lived life, they are the bones of belonging. Not every bold forecast will land. Some will age into folklore. Others will become plumbing. We've watched ideas migrate from awe to utility before. Relativity corrections. Now keep your map pin where you left it, as casually as breath corrects for speech. That's a healthy arc for good theories. To do work, then leave room for new wonder behind them. What matters is the style of attention we bring as the horizon widens. If time is softer than we thought, build schedules that respect bodies and keep promises. If consciousness is more plastic than we guessed, develop practices and tools that cultivate care, not addiction. If information is the currency of reality, trade honestly. If the universe is a computation no single mind can run, choose subroutines that reduce suffering and create durable order. Let theory bend toward conduct. A future in which children learn early that their sense of time is a skill would raise different adults able to pause without panic, hurry without cruelty, and alter failing plans before they harden. A future in which elders teach not only what happened, but how it felt in the body would give memory a fuller function than fact storage. It would transmit attentional styles that keep communities resilient when shocks arrive. A future in which tools extend attention without stealing it, would be a triumph worth more than novelty. These are large hopes, and they don't require certainty about eternalism or cosmic computation to begin. They require what our ancestors needed when they tried to write the sky down: patience, humility, stubborn curiosity, and a refusal to mistake confusion for failure. Theories can argue about rivers and landscapes. Lives still need bridges, and bridges are built from materials at hand: sleep and food, friendship and study, a talent for starting again. Somewhere, a child will ask the most practical version of the old question: if the future already exists, how do I live today? The answer starts closer than metaphysics, at the kitchen table, on playgrounds, in classrooms that smell faintly of glue and graphite. Teach time as a skill, not a fate. Show how attention stretches moments when we need care and compresses them when we're in flow. Teach that plans are promises to our future selves, and that revising a plan is not failing, it's listening. Teach that meaning comes from how we inhabit a moment, not from whether it was theoretically open. Motivation survives just fine in a world that might be timeless, because effort is how character becomes visible. You can tell a child, your choices matter so much that they're stitched into the fabric, in permanent features, like ridgelines on a map. Kindness isn't a gust of feeling, it's a trail others can trust. Courage isn't a spike of adrenaline, it's a bridge you leave behind. If everything is already there, those trails and bridges are there because you made them. That's not an argument for passivity. It's an invitation to craftsmanship. If one day we learn to bend paths through space-time, close loops around a fast spinning star, send messages that complicate our sense of before, we'll need a civics for chronology. The first law of such a civics is responsibility scales with reach. If you can touch the past, you inherit obligations to those who cannot. The second is coherence beats spectacle. It is better to preserve the integrity of many lives than to pursue a clever paradox. The third is consent across time. Promises should respect the people who will live with their consequences, not only the people who can sign them now. These principles sound simple because they are. They're the same ones that work for bridges and budgets, applied to timelines. The search for other minds enlarges the imagination. If intelligence appears elsewhere, it may carry a very different feel for duration. A civilization accustomed to perceiving long stretches at once might treat patience as the ground state, weaving policies across millennia with the casual competence we bring to a weekly schedule. Another might experience time in nested cycles, layering meaning as a spiral rather than a line. Contact would not only swap radio pulses, it would trade temporal styles, and we'd learn that our way of walking the garden is one path among many. Across all these possibilities, humility keeps pace with wonder. Physics keeps surprising us, yet it also keeps its promises. Relativity's unification of space and time is experimentally sturdy. Clocks tick differently with motion and gravity, and our instruments behave accordingly. The second law of thermodynamics continues to point toward a quiet horizon where gradients thin. Quantum theory predicts with eerie accuracy, while refusing to settle what its strangeness means. We should distinguish cleanly between the firm and the speculative. The block-like reading of space-time is a powerful interpretation, not a proven fact. Presentist and growing block pictures remain in play. Quantum foundations are a theater of many good scripts. Consciousness, meanwhile, stays at the center because it is the one thing we do not infer, we live it. Explanations that place mind at the end of a chain, emergent from matter, at the beginning, fundamental, or woven throughout, panpsychic shades, are all trying to honor the same unignorable datum. There is something it is like to be you, and that something is where questions start. Even if time is a static geometry, experience gives it music. Even if minds are information processes, something itches to say, I am, when those processes light up. That itch is not superstition. It is the very phenomenon a theory must eventually include. For daily life, this lands gently. Purpose does not require an uncharted future. It requires alignment with values you are willing to own. Responsibility does not require metaphysical indeterminism. It requires that your actions genuinely express your reasons and care. Progress does not require time to flow. It requires that later pages incorporate the lessons from earlier ones. These are not hedges. They are the terms on which meaning survives any revision of physics. Education can be tuned to this resilience. Teach forecasting and revision together. Imagine 3 futures. Act toward the best and update without shame when reality replies. Teach temporal literacy, how long it truly takes to calm down, to learn a skill, to heal, how urgency feels in the body, and how it differs from importance. Teach narrative honesty, the difference between a story we tell to protect ourselves and one that can bear scrutiny. Give children experiences of long arcs, gardens, instruments, languages, so their nervous systems learn the pleasure of plans that outlast a mood. Technology will offer new knobs on experience. Brain-computer interfaces may one day widen or narrow the binding window that we call the present. Virtual worlds already stretch and fold hours with narrative pacing, novelty, and feedback. Use these tools for training rather than escape, to practice steadiness when events accelerate, to rehearse difficult conversations without freezing, to feel safe while exploring memories that once felt perilous. The ethics here is simplicity itself. Do not take attention you cannot give back. Do not alter perception without informed, revocable consent. And do not outsource judgment to systems that cannot be questioned. At culture scale, rituals keep their quiet power. The ways communities mark seasons, mourn losses, and bless beginnings are the social equivalent of error-correcting codes. They keep shared memories coherent when entropy, misinformation, distraction, the grinding of daily stress tries to pull them apart. In a timeless description, these are features of the block. In lived description, they are how we stay human together. Speculation will continue to leap ahead of evidence, and that is fine, so long as curiosity keeps its harness. The holographic hints in gravity, the information bookkeeping at black hole horizons, the whispers that space-time might be emergent from entanglement rather than fundamental. These are not toys. They are careful guesses that earn their keep by tying mathematics to measurements in ways that made new tests possible. Tomorrow's picture may show today's block as a useful shadow of a deeper order. When that happens, carry forward what still works. Patience with paradox, precision with language, and tenderness for experience. The open question many feel most keenly is existential. If another century of discovery drains our intuitions even further, will meaning thin to transparency? The answer, on evidence, is no. Each time the universe turned out stranger than we hoped, it also turned out more dependable than we feared. Strangeness that keeps its own rules becomes a source of trust. Trust is the soil in which projects, friendships, and vows grow. Those do not depend on a metaphysics of flowing time. They depend on people showing up in repeated patterns that others can rely on. The laws may be the same under every sky. Meaning is still local, relational, earned. What holds steady beneath the shifting theories is simple and impossible. Awareness keeps showing up. Whatever the deep architecture of reality becomes in tomorrow's textbooks, block-like, branching, holographic, computational, there is, right now, a vantage that feels. It notices breath, hears a distant appliance, hum, weighs a memory, entertains a question. That undeniable presence is not a hypothesis waiting on evidence. It is the evidence from which every hypothesis begins. Whether mind rides along a finished geometry or helps generate the very interface we call space-time, the fact of experiencing does not blink. Answers may stay partial, and that is not a failure. Inquiry is a kind of weather that makes a landscape livable. Push on time, and it reveals seams. Push on matter, and it turns statistical. Push on identity, and it opens like a fan. Each push changes how we walk, not because the terrain rearranges itself for us, but because we learn more honest ways to balance on it. If the universe is built to withhold finality, it is also built to reward patient attention with deepening coherence. The reward is not a trophy labeled truth. It is the ease that comes when models fit experience with fewer grudges. From that ease, a practical ethic takes shape. Treat consciousness as precious wherever it appears your own, a child's, a stranger's, a species learning slowly to be less cruel to itself. Align plans with values you would gladly sign your name to if every page were held up to the light. Keep curiosity warm and disciplined at once. Warm enough to welcome surprise, disciplined enough to separate measurement from myth. Learn to pause before reacting so that the next act belongs to you on purpose, not to a reflex on loan from fear. These are small moves, yet they scale. A community that practices them grows habits that survive shocks. Stories told with care, disagreements that clarify rather than scorch, rituals that keep memory intact when noise rises. None of this requires certainty about whether time flows. It requires reliability, which is what meaning drinks when metaphysics runs low. Reliability is not rigidity. It is the promise to return, to repair, to remain in conversation long enough for honesty to do its steady work. If consciousness is the lens through which reality becomes legible, polishing the lens is not vanity, it is stewardship. Sleep mends attention, attention mends judgment, judgment guides action, action reshapes the slice of world you inhabit. A cleaned window does not change the mountain, but it changes how you travel toward it. Practices that widen the present a few measured breaths, a walk without the phone, a paragraph written by hand sound trivial until they are the difference between reacting and responding, between forgetting and remembering what you mean to be. Consider also the quiet courage of limits. Not knowing the whole plan is part of being a creature rather than a god. The unknown ahead is not a void to be conquered. It is the space where sincerity can occur. You act without omniscience, and the act is real anyway. You love without guarantees, and the love is real anyway. You keep a promise that no theory can force you to keep, and fidelity becomes an object in the world as tangible as any stone. If eternalism is right, those objects are permanent features. If it isn't, they are still the anchors by which a life resists being scattered by weather. There is a sober joy in admitting how far the mystery runs without surrendering clarity where clarity exists. Relativity keeps our satellites honest. Thermodynamics explains why tea grows cold and why beginnings matter. Quantum theory calculates cross-sections and half-lives with uncanny accuracy. None of that tells you what awareness is. It does tell you the stage directions under which awareness performs its scenes. The rest, the feel of a hand, the hush after forgiveness, the ache that accompanies beauty, is not an error term. It is the point. So we end where good nights often do, not with a verdict, but with a stance. Keep hypotheses provisional and compassion non-negotiable. Let wonder invite you to learn rather than to posture. Use precise words for precise claims and gentle words for the places language cannot yet reach. Share attention like a resource because it is, and when the old questions return, as they will, meet them as companions who keep you honest, not as prosecutors who demand an answer you do not own. You are here now, and the here now is ample. It contains memory and forecast, sorrow and relief, logic and lullaby. It contains the ancient human project of making a home inside the unknown by telling true stories and keeping decent promises. Whether time is a corridor you walk or a landscape you reveal by standing in it, the work remains. Notice, choose, tend. That work is not diminished by the possibility that everything endures. It is ennobled by it. In a universe that can be written as equations and still refuses to be exhausted by them, awareness is the light in which the equations are read. You are that light for your small section of cosmos. No one else can hold your exact angle, your composite of memory and intention, your signature way of caring. If the future is fixed, this moment is its living surface. If the future is open, this moment is its first door. Either way, step through with the style of line that is recognizably yours, firm where it must be, playful where it can be, capable of mending without tearing the page. The night has room for that. The world is strange enough to deserve your attention and steady enough to reward it. When you finally close your eyes, questions will idle like coals rather than burn like wires, warm, ready, patient. And when morning returns, as it always does, you will carry forward the one certainty that never needed a theorem. There is something it is like to be alive, and in that felt fact, meaning finds you again and again, exactly where you are.